Good morning, everybody. We are switching blocks. We just finished our geography block, and we are now working on our next history block. And this is Westward expansion, basically the 1800s. So buckle up, Buttercup, because U.S. history, real U.S. history, is pretty messy. So some books we are using, DK's Smithsonian. This is an encyclopedia, so we're going through with those. Yesterday, we went over the introduction to this chapter, and then Jefferson and the purchase of the Louisiana, what was Louisiana then, which is kind of funny because my daughter was like, why'd they do all that for one small state? And of course, it wasn't just one small state. And then we went over a little bit of the War of 1812 and Mr. Madison's War and the Battle of New Orleans and Tecumseh. So this is one of the books that we are using. Another book that we are using, which I really enjoy, is History of North America Map by Map. And this one is really interesting. I opened up straight to one of the more interesting things. So this is the Columbian Exchange. And if you've been following for a while, you know we did a lot on this last year. This was a big takeaway that I wanted. This was a monumental change for the world at the point that it's called the Columbian Exchange, but it's a little bit of a misnomer because yes, it is when Columbus invaded the Americas, but it's also much more than that. It's when constant contact between Afro-Eurasia and the Americans happened and how that impacted the world, not just the states, but the world in general. And there are a few positives, but there are a lot of negatives to this as well. It's really interesting. I have this in highlights. Before Columbus is a really great book, and another one is The Seeds of Change, I believe. And I can look those up if you guys are interested. Just let me know. So we're a little further along in this. It goes over the colonization, the British colonization, the French, Spain, the Atlantic slave trade. But I'm looking to where we are. Here we are. Empires to independence. So actually, we're not here either. This is still the Revolutionary War. We're still pretty further along. This is kind of where we are with the moving west. And you can see how much land is lost by the indigenous people as we go through. So this is a book that I'm using for the maps, to talk about the maps. And I really want, there's a great map in the back of this one. This is Sacagawea, and she has some really interesting information about the language and the pronunciation of this person's name and just the history. Like, I wonder if it's in the back. Yeah, the timeline, which is really interesting because there's a discrepancy on which Sacagawea we are talking about at her death, because the English and the native don't actually match. Okay, but on this, here's the map. There's this wonderful map that shows what states we had at this time, which was in 1803, and then what was considered Louisiana here, and this is the Corps of Discovery's map line, and then this is Spanish colonization, and my daughter's learning Spanish. So when she saw, she was like, Florida was Spanish? I was like, yeah, Florida was Spanish. So this is interesting because you can see here like how large this piece of land was. And so in this transaction, because the United States, quote, bought this from the French, and I say bought because these are all according to British or American law, obviously. It doubled the territory in size. But when we get over here with the Mexican-American War, this also increases the land mass substantially. And what's really interesting about this is that when you alter these borders, they just incorporate the people that are already there, for the most part, with exception to the native and indigenous populations, because the United States, which is really interesting, still doesn't think of them as being able to govern themselves, basically. They weren't, I don't even know what the word is, sovereign enough to have their own land. It's part of the martial laws, which I will eventually get into. But anyway, that is where we are yesterday. And then I'm also using this book, which we're not there yet. This is an anthology of Native history. So this is definitely middle school, high school level. Very good information, but it is kind of detailed and bulky in information. So I will definitely be helping my daughter digest this information. But this does go into the martial law, which affects the sale of Indian territories into to the United States. What makes that happen? Okay, a couple other books that we're using. This is Footsteps of Crazy Horse by John Marshall. I had on the plans, let's see if I have it. Yeah, I had on the plans this book, How I Become a Ghost by Tim Tingle, who's a native author. But we may still end up reading this, but I was looking for something that had a higher Lexile score. I wanted it to be a little more challenging. This is for a bit of a younger reader. And the Footsteps of Crazy Horse, it is a higher Lexile score. So we're going to be reading this. And another book that I got for this block is Bread for Words, and this is a story of Frederick Douglass. So I want to talk a little bit about why I'm using picture books. The things that picture books do, obviously, some of the writing is pretty complex, which is nice, but also what they tend to do, these kind of picture books, is give a lot of information in a short amount of time. So it really adds to the complexity and the view of our history, which is why we use a lot of picture books. Now, this definitely will not be the only aspect of Frederick Douglass that we go over, but it gives a little information about him, his life, his biography. So when we read his books, we have more context, more understanding of what is going on. And I'm looking here. I wanted to go over, but that's actually on my laptop, so I won't be able to do that. The different aspects of history that we are going over here. We're looking at westward expansion. We're looking at the Corps of Discovery, which is what most people know, Lewis and Clark's expedition across, and the Louisiana Purchase. We're looking at the railroad. We're looking at loss of indigenous lands. We're looking at the American slavery in well, it was throughout, I was going to say in the South, but it was throughout the entire country at the time. And leading up towards the Civil War.